Hello, everyone. I'm Norm Eisen. I'm the publisher of The Contrarian.
And I'm Jen Rubin. I'm the editor in chief of The Contrarian. We have with us Andrew Weissmann, who, for those of you who saw on Friday, gave what I think was the single best explanation of the really insidious nature of the termination of FBI agents. Andrew, what has happened since then? What have you seen?
So um, it's really interesting. We obviously know that there are some people who have been terminated. There are other people where we anticipate they may this week be terminated. The most insidious thing is that there is this demand, an order from Emile Beauvais, the acting Deputy Attorney General, a minute and 32 seconds ago, or as I like to say, given where I'm from, a New York minute ago, was the criminal defense counsel for Donald Trump.
Right.
And to my mind, is still acting that way and not in the best interest of the people of America or the Constitution or the civil service rules. But I'm jumping ahead. The main issue is that he has demanded that to FBI leadership that the names of every single person at the FBI who ever participated in any way, shape, or form on the January 6 investigations and prosecutions, that all of those names, that is analysts, paralegals, staff, FBI agents, they all be disclosed and turned over to the Department of Justice. And to me, this sets up what I think is, it makes the Saturday Night Massacre, and I hate to say this, but the three of us are old enough to remember that. And but this is much, much bigger. And that is what is on the table now. I understand that the deadline for the FBI to comply with that, which, by the way, is a Herculean undertaking, because it could be, reports are, it could be up to 6,000 or so people. That undertaking is supposed to happen by, I believe, Tuesday or thereabouts, but a very short time frame. So there are lots of issues we can explore about that list, but that's sort of where we are. So we have firings and we have anticipated adverse action against career people.
Now, the potential is that hundreds, if not thousands, of people could be terminated. Are you also concerned that the Justice Department would make these names public and that 1,500 January 6th related felons have been released or had their terms commuted, and that they would be in physical danger, or other people would seek to extract revenge?
So I was trying to think of a legitimate reason why somebody would want the names of everyone who participated and whatever role they had in connection with the January 6 cases. These, by the way, of course, are cases that have gone to court. There have been trials. They have had due process. And judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans have spoken out about the heinous nature of many of these activities, which, of course, up to and including horrendous violence. And so these are righteous cases. And I was trying to think of a reason what that would be legitimate for asking for these names. And the only thing I could think of that would be legitimate was, I was thinking back to 20 years ago, and Norm, you may remember this, when the Enron case happened, where
Andrew and I were on opposite sides of the Enron
exactly.
case.
And there was, after it was all over, everybody who worked in any significant way on that case received the Attorney General's Award for years of frankly, a privilege to work on those cases, but we also got that honor. That is obviously not what happening here. And how do we know that? How is it that the two other possibilities are really what's front and center. And those two possibilities, just to put a fine point on it, is that the list will be made public. And that means that the January 6th defendants, including people of which there are over 150 who have been convicted of crimes of violence, have been pardoned and are out there with a sense, I would think, of I'm immune from the law. Some of those people, as could be expected, have already recidivated, are recidivists. I'm not in any way saying that's true for everybody or that everybody is violent. But we already know that with respect to this idea of making the names public, we can look to what the administration has done with Mark Milley, with Dr. Fauci, with John Bolton, with other people, where they didn't just say, we're pulling your security detail. They publicly said that. That's a huge difference. There's no legitimate reason to do that publicly there's no legitimate reason, period. The only reason to do that publicly is so that there is a target on their head and you are sending a message to them and to future people. So that idea of making something public we have an example of that. And then obviously the other thing they can do, which they have said that they're going to do, is they're going to look at the list with respect to adverse employment actions. And so this isn't something where we have to speculate. You can look at the Emile Beauvais memos about what he has said about January 6th in these investigations. And if you permit me to be a nerd for a moment, I'm just going to read to you what he says so that people can see that this is not speculation as to what is going on here. Emile Beauvais, in his January 31st memo, says the following, and he's citing to Trump's executive order. He says, in an executive order issued on January 20th, 2025, President Trump appropriately, that's Emile Beauvais' word, appropriately characterized that the work, he's referring to the work related to the January 6th prosecutions, as having involved a grave national injustice that has been perpetrated upon the American people over the last 4 years. So a dispassionate question for our listeners is, can you please tell me what about the investigation and prosecutions of the January 6 cases is a grave national injustice, especially when you think about the fact that these prosecutions, the investigations, started under the first Trump administration. They started on January 7th.
Andrew, one of the things that Jen and I like to focus on in our coverage is not only the crisis, and the crises have been manifold, starting in the transition and rolling through the inauguration, but we like to focus on solutions. And you were the general counsel of the FBI. I was so heartened to see the SACs. That's how you know that I'm an FBI aficionado, not Sachs. The SACs, the special agents in charge, are reportedly standing up to this order and defying the order. We've seen one in New York already publicly indicate that that they will not comply, and reports that many others are considering doing it. Would you reflect on that a little bit yourself as a person of the FBI, one who's worked with FBI agents for so many decades, but also would you reflect on that from the perspective of our democracy? What is the point at which pandering to violent criminals who have assaulted the American idea just gets to be too much, not only for FBI personnel, but for the country?
So one, I have never been prouder of the leadership at the FBI in terms of what they're doing now. And, you know, I am the first to say, I am not here to say that everything the FBI does and every FBI agent hasn't made mistakes, and that there aren't people who have done more than that. That is not what I'm here for. And there's no institution in America that can't be criticized and can't be improved. And that's true for the FBI. So let's just leave that as an aside. But that doesn't mean that firing people without cause and violating civil service rules and the due process clause and potentially threatening them with violence is proper. So, one, I too have heard that up to and including the acting director are pushing back. And there's signs of that, including from emails where the acting director has sent out to the field various missives, making it clear that he is not on board. And I've also, as you have heard, that the special agents in charge are really standing up for the line agents and personnel, saying, you know what, you want our names? Take our names. But to me, this reads exactly like the Saturday Night Massacre. What I have been upset about, in addition to the idea that this is coming from the Department of Justice leadership, where if any institution should be obeying the law and fighting for the law, it should be the Department of Justice. So the idea that this is infiltrated into the heads of the acting Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General is incredibly upsetting. But also the FBI General Counsel, where in God's green earth is he? The hard part of that job is, fortunately, I was there under Director Mueller, so I did not have a director where I had to worry about the compliance with the law. I revered him, and I could go on, and I'm not going to here. But this is in his finest traditions. And the one thing I will say about the Bureau, with the caveat I gave at the outset, is that Bureau agents are trained in the law. They have to go to court. They get cross-examined. They get asked questions by judges. They get asked questions by defense lawyers. Norm, you've been a defense lawyer and are a defense lawyer. I've been a defense lawyer. They are trained in what it means to be part of the American criminal justice system. And I see them saying, you know what, that's where my loyalty is. And when there is something that I'm being told to do that is going to not only, in their view, be against the law, but is going to harm the FBI and its personnel from doing its mission for the public, they're not okay with that.
Two quick points before we let you go, Andrew. One is full disclosure. New York Times just broke the story. It's not only incumbent on the men and women of the FBI to defend the law, but it is on all of us as Americans to stand behind them. And the Times just reported that together with my state Democracy Defenders Fund fellow board member, retired Judge Nancy Gertner, and the DC Attorney Mark Zaid, who often represents FBI agents, we've written a letter to Mr. Bove, the leadership of the FBI, reminding them not only of their moral duties, but their ethical and legal duties, and warning them of very severe consequences. I had the privilege of having an FBI field office, and when I was ambassador, and I was a regular visitor to Director Mueller, who really probably the greatest director ever of the FBI. One of the things he and I talked about is that FBI leadership is trained not just in law enforcement, but in democracy. And they go to the Holocaust Museum as part of that training. And they learn what happens when a democracy deteriorates. And I'm not making any comparison to that terrible event, but it is a reminder that they are guardians of our laws, of the American people, and of our democracy.
So I made the same point to Jen about that training. And what it means to the Bureau that there is that training. But I will make an analogy, and I know it can be perilous and people can make it overblown, but I do think with respect to lawyers in the system, when you look at the lawyers in autocratic regimes, there is a special and important role for lawyers to not be complicit, because everybody wants to look for what I'm doing is legal. And if you have lawyers who are not acting in good faith, who, to use a hackneyed phrase, bend the knee, that is how you sort of get to those kinds of regimes. And so in our profession, there is a special obligation for people to really be faithful to the law and the Constitution.
Andrew, one final question. Kash Patel came before that Senate Judiciary Committee as this was slow rolling, and now we've seen more of it. Should the Senate call him back to ask whether he would abide by this?
I think they have to call him back, and they have to call Pam Bondi back. And let's assume they were completely qualified and there were no issues with them, simply to get their view of the law and the propriety of this and what their views are in terms of the rights, whether a list like this should be compiled, whether it should ever be made public, what they would do to either further that or prevent it. And with Kash Patel, there are other issues because he also made various statements about being unaware of any of this going on. That is something that I think he needs to answer, especially because the reports are that some of his people are already on the 7th floor of the FBI. And so you'd want to know, did they really not have any communication whatsoever about what was going on? And that's possible, but it certainly is an area for inquiry.
And we should ask him whether he would reverse it or what he would do or how he would instruct these people.
And we didn't have his SF-278, his financial disclosures when he testified. There's some very concerning disclosures in there, including foreign connections. That needs to be the subject of examination under oath as well. But certainly with what's happened, as you say, this massacre, it's more than one night. It's stretching over days. The slow motion massacre. Kash Patel must be recalled.
And so, look, I know that for our listeners, there's a lot of sort of hair on fire, and there's the sort of crisis du jour, and there's a tendency for everything to sort of seem overblown, and thus nothing seems, important. It sort of can be diminished. It's almost like the boy who cries wolf. It is true that this is an institution that's dear to my heart, both the Department of Justice and the FBI, having worked, together over 20 years in those places. If you thought that the Saturday Night Massacre meant anything in terms of our justice system, and if you thought that the people who resisted that are national heroes and correctly have gone down in history that way, I cannot stress to people enough that this makes that episode look so minor, because that was just about, just in air quotes, about the special counsel investigating wrongdoing within the executive. This is a full-on takeover of the Bureau and saying that all sort of congressional rules and due process rights are gone. And it really symbolizes that the inmates are running the show, that the people who did the righteous prosecutions will be the targets, and the people who are the convicted criminals, some awaiting trial, are the people who are free to potentially exact revenge.
Well, with the good news being resistance mounting within the FBI, loyalty to democracy, and outside its walls, the public, and I think the courts rallying powerfully to the cause of the rule of law.
I agree with that. I think we've seen the courts doing. I'm hopeful they will stand up.
I'm just guessing, but I think there's going to be more of that this weekend.
We certainly hope so. And I would make one further plea, and that is Republicans in the end can vote how they want, but not to return these two individuals for further questioning makes a mockery of the Senate, makes them look like complicit fools. And they will then be responsible for what happens to these agents and all the assembled personnel whether it is an employment action or, God forbid, something worse. Those senators will be responsible.
I agree. And you would think that the triumvirate that we saw with respect to Hegseth, of McConnell, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, that this would give them enough ammunition to get at least one other senator to say at least that we need to have a continued hearing to have questioning on this issue.
We hope so. Thank you, Andrew, for being with us. I know it's a difficult time for the country and for you personally, so we thank you for your insight once again.
And for your public service. You're continuing it by sharing your views with our contrarian community. Thanks, Andrew.
And to finish the Love Fest, thank you very much for your work.
We definitely have to have him back.
Absolutely.